Hello, welcome to Philosophy All Along. I'm really glad to have you here today. I want to talk about something that I think, so far, at least in my observation, has been a bit under discussed about Wicked, which is the question of disability. The film seems to clearly present disability to us. And there has been noticeably on the part of the actress who plays Nessa Rose um, uh, some frustration where she's pointed out that people are making jokes about Nessa Rose's um, being wheelchair bound. And so she's argued that it's crass and problematic. And I certainly agree. And I think it's important to kind of dig into what is the film saying about the way that we as a society deal with disability, because I think it's actually very profound. So let's kind of dig right in. So the fact that the film is dealing with disability seems obvious, right? Not only do we have Nessa Rose, who happens to be a character in a wheelchair, but we also have Elphaba, who is treated as if she has a disability because she is green. How do we know this? Because Glinda tells her that she will fix her. Like, oh, when I have my sorceress powers, I'll be able to help you. So, especially early on in the film, the issue of someone being treated as disabled is a big deal and very, very present, ranging from Nessa Rose's experience to Elphaba's experience. And we're also presented with the way that they deal with that, the way that other people treat them because of their differences, ranging from people suggesting that Nessa Rose needs help. Oh, let's make sure to provide her the support and help that she needs. Whereas Elphaba will often reflect on, no, she doesn't need help. Just let Nessa Rose go ahead. She can get to the room herself. She can do what she needs to do on her own. She doesn't need someone to take care of her. And also Elphaba's own tendency towards being self-protective, right? She's ready to go. No, I didn't eat grass as a child, and that kind of thing. So the reason why I think this is important is because it shows us two different ways that we as a society address um, disability. So one, I think that's important, kind of outside of the film itself, is the very fact that in the novel upon which the musical and the film is based, Nessa Rose isn't wheelchair bound. She actually is a person who does not have arms. And so that is really interesting to me because in making that change, one could argue, okay, well, there's more people who have a wheelchair experience than an armless experience. So maybe the musical and the film are kind of reaching out to a broader audience, or one that seems more uh, accessible to the audience of people who are not having those experiences, right? Because they're more likely to have seen someone in a wheelchair than they are to have seen someone who doesn't have arms. Either which way, I think it speaks to a problem in the fact that the book has addressed people who struggle in terms of not having certain limbs, right? And then the way society treats them as a result of that, shifting it and kind of taking a bit of voice away from those people and say, okay, well, almost as if, well, it's all disabilities are alike, right? Okay. And so we can just kind of sub in someone who has a wheelchair for someone who doesn't have arms. Now, there's probably really just very practical reasons in terms of people being able to dance and certain balance issues and that kind of stuff when it comes to, okay, we're doing this in a musical, like what if this person gets hurt, right, because they don't have arms, and there's just probably legal issues. But the end result still is a bit of this issue, this bit of this problem of, okay, well, here's a group of people who has even less representation than the wheelchair bound. At least they had representation in this novel, but they don't manage to be recognized in the musical or in the film. And so I think that that's important. And I do think, interestingly, and I could be completely wrong about this, that the film does try to gesture at least towards that original expression of Nessa Rose as not having arms by having some dancing characters in in the Emerald City who you'll notice don't have arms. And so I couldn't help but think, oh, I wonder if they're trying to make a gesture towards the original depiction of Nessa Rose. Okay, so that's one thing that I think is important. Now, you might be hearing that and kind of go, okay, well, that just kind of like sounds like a criticism and just like, oh, more whining about representation. The reason why this is important is because what it brings to light is something that the film really wants to bring to light, which is how incredibly difficult it is to separate out our understanding of disability and our tendency to either construct it as something that needs to be pitied or something that needs to be condemned. And in both cases, as something that needs to be fixed. So, what we have is this problem of not hearing when Elphaba tells us that Nessa Rose doesn't need help. But she is often the object of pity, and she's aware of this. She thinks that Bach is asking her to the Ozdas ball because she's wheelchair bound. But that idea of not needing help is important because when there are people who have disability who refuse help, say, no, there's actually nothing wrong with me, there's nothing about me that needs to be fixed, I do not want your help, there is a tendency to treat them as villainous. And that's what happens to Elphaba. That, in other words, our understanding, and by that what I mean is really the way that we construct the idea of disability, is one that permits us to go, oh, that poor person, if only we could fix them or help them. Well, if we can't, we'll have pity for them as long as they know that they're in that tragic space. But if they refuse that help, there's a tendency to treat them as villainous. And so a great example of that in kind of our own world is cochlear implants. So cochlear implants are, these medical devices that you can install, usually in very young children, that take children who don't have the ability to hear and provides them with the ability to hear. And there is this thing that is confusing for many hearing people because it's not altogether uncommon for deaf parents to be offered the opportunity to have cochlear implants installed in their children. Say, you know what, actually, we're not going to do that. I don't want to do that. And the hearing community, often the doctors, are appalled. What, are you saying you want to condemn your child to deafness? Why? And the parents are like, well, in our community, it's not a problem. We don't really view it as something like they're missing out on life, or there's, we want them to be a full participant in our community. And then our response tends to be, oh, so you selfishly want to keep your child to yourself and you refuse to fix them because of your own selfishness. And the parent goes, that's exactly the problem. My child's not broken. My child doesn't need to be fixed. They don't need to be fixed by you. The fact that they cannot hear is not a function of them being broken. So that gets at the core of disability and the fundamental problem with our way of understanding it. And that's really highlighted by Wicked, which is simply this. Look at the word itself, disability. It tells you everything that you need to know about the way that we think of disability, i.e., that it is an ability that you don't have, that you should have, disability. And the reason why that's important is instead of being a different ability, right? Different ability, and that makes sense when you think about it. We all have different sets of abilities, right? Some people can play piano, other people can play violin, some people are carpenters, right? I literally lack the ability to effectively saw through anything. So I don't, however, view that as my disability. So instead of looking at people as having different sets of abilities, we have in our society this idea that there's the abilities that you should have, and if you don't have them, then you have a disability. You are lacking an ability you should have, that you are fundamentally lacking. And if only we could fix you. People who refuse to be fixed in this way then are looked down upon as somehow villainous in the way that we tend to treat parents who don't want their children to have cochlear implants. And from their perspective, they're like, our child's fine. And for people outside of their community, that's often very difficult to understand. But it's important to understand that there's lots of abilities that all of us lack that we never think of as being, oh, well, I'm disabled because of it. There's lots of things that I can't do, ranging from pyrokinetics to telekinetics. I can't read other people's minds. I can't lift things with my mind. Like, there's lots of abilities that I don't have, that I don't think of myself as disabled because of it. So disabled must mean something other than, oh, just having a particular set of abilities and not having another set of abilities. It must mean something along the lines of there's something wrong with you, right? You have a disability, not a differability. The example that I like to use, and I'll be very, very quick on this one, but imagine in Shiz, for instance, that everyone actually can levitate. That's a common ability rather than an incredibly rare one, right? That everyone at Shiz University has the ability to go around and fly. Well, think about how differently built Shiz University would be, like what the actual physical structures of the buildings would be. Like what kinds of stuff that would they not bother to spend the money to build because you don't need it. And it would be stuff like stairwells, right? You don't need stairwells, you don't need elevators in a university in which everyone can already fly. Think about how different like the basketball team would be, right? Like a slam dunk would be unimpressive and not meaningful, right? In a world in which everyone has the ability to fly. So now imagine that you have the one child who doesn't have the ability to fly and you send them to school. Well, how do they navigate that space? There's no stairwells for them to get to their classes that are on the second floor, right? There's no elevators to help them. And it could be really frustrating. Like they end up being late to class all the time. It's kind of humiliating because they have to have like someone else fly them to class, right? And being late to class might result in them not doing as well on the subject. So they're taking tests and the tests are telling them that they don't know that, say it's a math class, that they don't know math as well, but really it's not a problem of them not knowing math. It's a problem of them always being late to class because they have to get someone to fly them up to class. And you as their parent might be really frustrated and you might, call the school and be like, listen, you have to at least like put in a rope or something so they can pull themselves up. And the school will be like, why should we have to spend money for your one child so that we can change the building? Now, my whole point is imagine that you were that one child. The reason why I think this is important is because you go, wait a minute, okay, so all of a sudden I would feel very disabled in that school, right? I can't get to the classes I need to get to. I can't play on the basketball team, right? Like all of these things are things in which I cannot participate in. People are having to treat me differently than they treat everybody else, et cetera, et cetera. But what's wild about it is none of us can actually levitate or go around and fly. And we've never once thought to ourselves, oh, I'm disabled because of it. In other words, it's only in a world in which the world is built around the presumption that everyone can levitate that all of a sudden you become disabled because you don't have that ability. And so for like the deaf community, I think part of their argument ends up being, look, what we're trying to say is the way you've constructed society, you assume that everyone can hear. So when we go navigate in that society, yeah, we're disabled because you